Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite non-Stonemaier games that we may have published if we had the chance to do so. I'll talk about what I like about these games, why I think they could have been a good fit for Stonemaier Games, and maybe even some things that I would have done a little bit differently if I can think of any. But these are games that I really, really love. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, I did a video like this around four and a half years ago, back in 2019. So I talked about this topic, but I wanted to revisit it because there are so many amazing games that are released all the time. And I think it's an interesting angle, a different angle from my publishing and designing point of view to see games that we may have published at Stonemaier Games if we'd had the opportunity. Notably, I'll mention that previous list in a minute because I will not include any games that were already on that list because they're already on that video. I will link to that video below so you can check it out. And just to set the framework for what a Stonemaier game is, our general guidelines, with the exception of Smitten, actually, which happens to be right behind me, is that our core tenets and guidelines, the types of games that we publish are games that play at least 2 to 5 players. We add an Automa solo mode as well. So they all end up being at least 1 to 5 players, sometimes higher player counts, but not only 2-player only games, not 2 to 3, not 2 to 4. It's got to be 2 to 5, and we add solo. So 1 to 5 in the end. The flow of the game must be smooth. Usually that means quick, simple turns, but not always. Strong sense of progression. This often results in some form of engine building. I want players to feel stronger at the end of the game than at the beginning. We try to strive to have games that are intuitive to learn and teach, even though there's a lot of variability in our games, or we try to have a lot of replayability and variability. Low conflict. So often positive player interaction or reasons to pay attention to other players, but not a way to destroy what they have created. And last, we like our games to feature beautiful components, often a specific component that is featured in the game. So the original list was the following games. I can't remember the order. This is just the order that I made a note in. Tzolk'in, Mysterium, Orleans, Seven Wonders, Lords of Waterdeep, Architects of the West Kingdom, Quacks of Quedlinburg, Isle of Skye, Downforce, and Ra. And I also asked our ambassadors recently what they thought of, if they thought of any games that they thought could have been a good fit for Stonemaier Games. And some of these actually would not have been eligible, but I'll read the list, and some of them were on the previous list. So Architects of the West Kingdom, that was on the previous list. Ark Nova, not eligible technically because it doesn't play up to 5 players. Tzolk'in and Clank also don't play. Actually, Tzolk'in I included on the previous list. I probably shouldn't have because it only plays 4 out of the box. Clank only plays 4 out of the box. Concordia, Earth, Bad Company, Distilled, which I haven't played yet. Dune Imperium, again, plays 4, so not eligible. Everdell, also, I believe, only plays up to 4, not eligible. Aquatica, First Rat, The Isle of Cats, again, up to 4 players. Expansion brings up to 5 or 6. Lords of Waterdeep, Orleans, Obsession, Parks, Planet Unknown, Quacks of Quedlinburg, Spirit Island, and Terraforming Mars. Again, ambassadors didn't necessarily have the context that I talked about some of these games on the previous list. So before I jump into my top 10, I wanted to give some special mentions, one of them being Libertalia. When I made this previous list 4 years ago, I did not know that we would be creating a brand new edition of Libertalia, Libertalia Winds of Galecrest. And so this Libertalia would have been on the list. This is a non-Stonemaier game originally that we probably may have considered publishing if we'd had the chance. And we had the chance to publish a version of the game and to rework the game with designer Paolo Mori. So Libertalia is a very special mention for this list. Rumble Nation, actually, so the remaining games on the special list are games that did come across our table or our inbox, and that for various reasons they just didn't end up working out as a Stonemaier game. Rumble Nation was one such game, trying to get the English rights to the game, but ran into a few roadblocks there with Rumble Nation, but I still absolutely love the game. Anachrony, this is an early version of the game, was submitted to us by David. Terracotta Army also came across our inbox, our files, our submission group. I actually got to play that with the designer virtually. Terracotta Army, had a great time with it. I've enjoyed the plays of the final version of the game too. Mariposas, so this was an Elizabeth Hargrave game, her follow-up to Wingspan, and Elizabeth showed it to me and asked if I would be interested in it. I thought the game was really clever, but I thought it needed a stronger sense of progression to be an event style game that Stonemaier Games would publish. And she liked it at the lighter weight, and so she stuck with AEG. I think they did a fantastic job with the game. And then either Dwellings of Eldervale or Cryo. I know that Luke at one point messaged me a long time ago and said that he was working on a game. He gave me the very short pitch of the game, and I'm not sure if that game ended up becoming Dwellings of Eldervale or Cryo, but it was a 4-player only game. And so I told him, Luke, thank you for considering, but we would only look at the game if you can play up to 5 players. So I think he ended up going a different direction with that. Both games ended up being excellent, whichever one it was, Dwellings of Eldervale or Cryo. Let's jump into the top 10 lists, and here I will share my other screen here. So at number 10, we have Parks. Parks is a one-way action selection track game, which we have one of these kind of with Tapestry, but not in the truest sense of one-way action selection, where you can move as far along the track as you want, foregoing all previous spaces. That happens in Tapestry, but you can only move forward one space in Tapestry. But it's a mechanism that I love. I'd love to have this in a Stonemaier game. Parks, I think, plays well up to 5 players. I think it plays best at 2 to 3 players. But even among our games, while we stand by every player count, there's certainly some games that I prefer to play at some player counts over others. And I think Parks could have been an example of that. Parks, as you can see, has beautiful art. It even has the St. Louis Arch in it, an Easter egg that we include in many of our games. Has beautiful components. Even a really nice inserts go in the game. The game fits really well into the box. It's easy to teach. It's easy to play. But there's a lot of depth and variability to the play. There's a nice sense of progression to it in the various item cards that you can get. And it's very satisfying to complete the goal cards in the game. Get these national parks over into your tableau. It's an exceptionally clever, beautiful, well-designed game. And I think it fits all of the Stonemaier Games tenets. Let's see if there's anything that I would change if this were a Stonemaier game. There isn't much I would change. I think I might try to do something at the higher player counts to give the game a little bit of a nudge at those player counts. I think the game can overstay its welcome at 4 or 5 players, and I'm not sure exactly what I would do to fix that in the game. But that would be something that I would look to address a little bit, those higher player counts. But I do love Parks, and I think it is a game that we could have potentially published if it had been submitted to us. But I love what this publisher ended up doing with it. So that is Parks at number 10. And number 9, I kind of forgot that I put Mysterium on my original list, but I love Mysterium Park so much. I really, really love this game. We don't have many cooperative games at all at Stonemaier Games. I'd love to have more of them. Mysterium Park is a game that plays in about 30 minutes. So it isn't quite an event game, but it's right on that cusp. It's easy to teach. It's easy to play. It has beautiful art and components. All players are participating the whole game. It plays up to 6 players. And it really does actually scale well down to 2 players. So this is a fully cooperative game where one player is a ghost and they're giving clues to the other players in the form of illustrated cards that represent kind of visions or dreams. And the other players are working together to narrow down the list of where a murder happened or whatever the bad thing happened, where it happened, and who did it. And it's just a brilliant cooperative game. This game hasn't gotten the same level of acclaim that the original Mysterium did, which was on my original list, but it's a delightful, wonderful game. And so I love it. I have it on my shelf. I will pull it out at any time. I had it out this past weekend when we were playing games. So yeah, Mysterium Park is a game that would fit well, I think, within the Stonemaier Games lineup. Next up at number 8, we have Concordia. Concordia is a brilliant 2 to 5 player game. Maybe it plays solo, where the action selection system is something that I've actually used a little bit, a version of it in Expeditions. So it's where you have a hand of cards. You can use any of those cards on your turn, and it goes into a discard pile. And on your turn, on some turns, you will take a retrieve turn where you retrieve all those cards from your discard pile and get them back into your hand. So it's like deck building without any randomness, at least in the cards that you have in your own supply. It's a brilliant action selection mechanism, and the game ties that to a lot of positive player interaction elements that still have a lot of tension. There's maps of the games. I'd love to have more games with maps because I think it's a great way to create variability from in like expansions and things like that. Concordia has multiple maps you can use. And like I said, it has this great positive player interaction element to the game where if you are in a region and you produce in that region, you take a produce action, then it produces for everyone who has presence in that region. And also, if you refresh, it helps everyone who is waiting to produce again. That's one example. I think there's some other examples as well of positive player interaction in this game. Also, the dual use cards are so clever where they're used during the game for actions, but they're used for scoring at the end of the game. I think the game looks beautiful on the table. I think maybe the one thing that I would change is probably the box art, which I think has gotten it, yeah, I don't love how the box art draws me into the game, but once I get it on the table, I think it looks amazing. So that's probably the one element I might change about this game, the box art. But yeah, otherwise, I think it is a beautiful, wonderful game to play. That is Concordia at number 8, and it really does scratch all the itches that we look for at Stonemaier Games. At number 7 is a fairly recent game. This is Raising Robots. I really enjoyed this game for its complexity that you can play with in just over an hour usually. You're taking 8 turns over the course of the game. All turns are simultaneous, and you're running an engine based on some decisions that you made that could affect other players. And you can be affected by the actions that they selected as well. So fully simultaneous, but there's still this element of player interaction, a really positive player interaction based on actions that other players choose. And you just then run your engine simultaneously with other players. You activate your character. You activate your this upgrade action, how you make actions stronger. You move these little tokens around. So it's not just putting cards into a tableau, but you're actively putting things on those cards and making them better, similar to what we have in Wingspan. I love tableau building, and I love having tableau building be more than just the cards, where you're actually putting tokens on those cards or removing tokens from the cards to make them better. And it's an incredible Raising Robots is an incredible engine building game that flows so well because of the simultaneous nature of it. But it has a ton of variability, a ton of complexity that emerges from the cards that you choose to play. It's also a very colorful, beautiful game. I think they did a great job with the art. There really isn't much that I would change about the game. I think it's probably a fairly expensive game to produce, at least the mass production version of it, because you have these silkscreen printed tokens that add quite a bit of cost. And the player mats are double wrapped. So I might look at some of the production elements. I haven't played the standard retail version, so they might be more cost effective. But is there anything really I would change about it? I don't know if there's much that I would change. There is this element over here of this element of the goals in the game that I don't pay as much attention to. My attention is more on optimizing my engine, but I don't know if I would cut them. I don't know. Yeah, the character, the thing that makes the game a little bit hard to start playing is that you have to make choices regarding your character, which you can randomize and just say everybody has a unique character. You don't have to give players a choice there. But also these goal cards, there's quite a bit that you need to explain about the game before someone can understand which goals to choose. And so I usually try to remove any elements from games or major elements in games that require players to understand a huge amount about the rules of the game before they actually make an early decision in the game. I usually try to streamline those or just make them random at the beginning of the game. So that's something that I might trim a little bit out of Raising Robots. But overall, I've had a great experience learning, teaching, and playing the game. And I think it would fit well with Stonemaier Games. Next up, we have, what is this, number 5, Fantastic Factories. This is another simultaneous action selection game with a little bit of interaction in terms of a public display of cards that you draw from or you choose from once per round. But then everything else is simultaneous, and you're just running an engine with these dice that have some standard actions you can place them on, and then a wide variety of cards that you can place them on. I would say that the expansion adds a really key component. I love the core game, but the expansion does add a component that lets you manipulate one of your dice, +or -1. And that really does help. It helps you when you built this awesome engine and you don't roll the dice that you need for it. Having that little bit of flexibility really goes a long way. So I really like that element. I might put that in the core game. But otherwise, I think the game flows incredibly well. It's really, really satisfying to get your engine up and running in Fantastic Factories. I talked about it recently in my simultaneous videos list because I think it plays super well for the level of decisions that you're making in the game, but having it still flow really well. And you still are engaged in a race with other players to get to I believe, either 10 cards or maybe it's 12 points. It's one or the other. You can choose which one that you want to pursue. And that triggers the end of the game. So really satisfying game. Fantastic Factories at number 5. And again, it does meet all of our requirements. I will try not to keep repeating that, but obviously any game on this list does meet our core tenets of game design and guidelines for Stonemaier Games. Next up, we have Planet Unknown. This is a polyomino engine building game with, again, simultaneous play. A lot of simultaneous play here, even though Stonemaier Games we don't feature a lot of games that have simultaneous play, but I really like these meteor experiences where all players are taking their turn simultaneously. I am generally more interested in games where I am making something awesome on my own rather than games where I can disrupt what other players are doing. I want to admire what they're creating, but not disrupt it. And Planet Unknown still has some interaction with this big Lazy Susan device that you can rotate around, and a player can align it with them if they're the active player to choose from 2 different polyomino tiles linked to them, and then all of the players have this device oriented towards them, and they get to choose one of the 2 tiles. So there is still this soft player interaction that happens, but there's not a lot of it. Mostly you're just creating your own thing, and I am perfectly fine with that in games. I really like that in games. But I love the engine building. In fact, this looks like a prototype because I think the final version of this player mat is dual layered. Let's see if I can find a photo of the final version. There are a ton of planets, oh, that's creepy. But there are a ton of different planets that you can play with in this game. I have enough fun playing even just with the original mat where you're trying to fill up rows and columns, things like that. But different mats have different goals, different objectives you're trying to pursue. But the key thing I think that really stands out about this game that makes it feel like a Stonemaier game are the double rewards. This is something you see in many of our games, in particular Scythe. I designed Scythe around the idea of double rewards. Whenever you take a turn, you're often getting 2 benefits, sometimes even more. And in this game, whenever you choose a tile, every polyomino tile has 2 different benefits on it, 2 different terrain types. And those terrain types align with these tracks. You get to move up on 2 different tracks with pretty much every tile that you place. That feels really good. So not only are you placing the tile on the board, moving yourself towards, filling up more rows and columns. That's one reward. But also immediately you're moving up 2 tracks, which might even trigger even other rewards. Feels really, really good. It is just a game that makes me feel good. And that's the type of game that I like to publish. So that's Planet Unknown at number 5. And number 4 is First Rat. This is another one-way action selection track game. And this is a game that really leans into that common with 3 different one-way action selection tracks. 1 for the rats themselves, where you're placing them along this track. 2 for the light bulbs. There's this light bulb track that keeps the action spaces illuminated for special benefits. And there's also a track that you can't quite see on this photo. There's another track that you go around. So you're actually you're looping on that track if you want to get other special benefits. This is just a charming game from the ground up. Like it plays super smoothly at all player counts that I've played, all the way up to 5 players. There's a lot of variability in that you have one side of the board that has the actions built in. These players are playing with the variable side of the board where the tiles themselves are variable. And it's just really satisfying to build up this engine to compete over certain elements. You're kind of creating a ship to go to the moon, which is made of cheese. So it has the silly theme, but it still feels like a really solid medium weight game, despite having a little bit of silliness to it. I'm okay with a little bit of silliness. You can see that in kind of the Easter eggs in Stonemaier Games, things like that. Is there really much I would change about this game? It does the setup for the game. It really isn't even that bad. If you use the other side of the board, where you don't have to put all the action tiles on here, setup is pretty fast. There are a few elements to randomize. There are these different tokens up here, these scoring tokens, and there are some benefit tokens that you have to randomize. So there are a few elements that you have to randomize, and they were all made language independent, so you often have to reference a separate book to see them. I probably would maybe do those elements a little bit differently so that you don't have to reference a rule book to understand what they mean. They try their best with icons, but I think for some of them, they don't quite get there. But overall, this game, First Rat, I love this game, and it fits all the Stonemaier Games guidelines that I can think of. So that is my number 4 pick for this list. And number 3 is another fairly new game, Forest Shuffle from 2023. This is another tableau building game, and this is one where you're not putting things on the cards, but that's okay because you're building a forest, but you're building these little ecosystems around specific trees. I think this is such a brilliant mechanism where you are tucking cards under a tree to make that tree better, to make the animals around it better, and just add this satisfying sense of completion when you do complete a tree and you have all 4 sides surrounded. And along with this, I think one of the component hooks for the game are these cards that are divided in half. I can see this one is. So for every card, you essentially have 2 cards, and you're deciding which tree to slot it under and which side of the card to slot under that tree. There's a lot of unique benefits and abilities in this game that I think are really satisfying. I've never played 2 games of Forest Shuffle that felt identical. And yeah, and even the public display, I love in this game where you are playing cards, when you're paying cards to play cards, and the cards that you play, you're essentially discarding them into this common row. And so you might actually get them back, or another player might get them. So there's a lot of great player interaction centralized with this board right here, because players are putting cards into that area all the time. Yeah, just this is a delightful game. I love Forest Shuffle, and it does play really, really smoothly up to 5 players, which is oftentimes there are a lot of games that didn't quite make this list because they don't play 5 players out of the box. All these games do, and Forest Shuffle is one of those games, and one of the ones that does not play it simultaneously. It doesn't need to, because turns are so snappy in Forest Shuffle. That's number 3, Forest Shuffle on my list. And number 2 is Space Base, a game that has really grown on me over the years. Space Base is one of these games where it uses the exact right amount of brain power that I want to use, often at a game night after a long day at work, where I can have great decisions, I can have satisfying decisions, but it doesn't require just all that much brain power. In this game, one player is rolling 2 dice, and all players potentially get to activate a card on their board, a slot on their board, based on what dice were rolled. So, for example, I don't know if there's any good examples here, but it depends on the colors of these cards if you are allowed to activate them when it is someone else's turn. But this game, it only has 3 resources. It has the currency, it has points, and it has kind of economy, which is how many points you get by default each or how many coins, what currency you get by default each round. And it just has a wonderful sense of progression. Every turn you are involved in getting something, but when it is your turn, you're allowed to buy a card and add it to your tableau. And that happens pretty much every turn that you take in the game. It's really satisfying to see your tableau get better and better over the course of the game. There are a lot of cards in the middle of the table, and they are icon heavy, but most of them are pretty well explained. You don't really need further text to explain what those cards do. We very rarely have to reference the rulebook in this game, but yeah, I wouldn't quite call this a simultaneous game, but players are involved and engaged on every player's turn, which I think is wonderful. I'm always looking for that in games, and the entire production, I think, is beautifully done. So yeah, Space Base, I think, would definitely fit in well inside the Stonemaier lineup if it had been a game that was originally submitted to us. And last up, we have, again, another very recent game. This is Earth, another tableau building game with a lot of unique cards. You're putting things on those cards to make them better, to give them a sense of growth and development over the course of the game. And it's Inside Up did an incredible job with this game. The designer did a wonderful job with this game. I think it's brought a lot of joy to my table, and because it is also simultaneous with some nice simultaneous twists. There is it plays really smoothly in typically under 90 minutes, despite you having a lot of things you can do that make you feel really good. At least makes me feel really good. And there are even some goals that you're racing to with other players, so you're still engaged and paying attention to what other players are doing as you race towards those goals. There's so much variability in this game it's the type of game that we want to make games that people want to get to their table over and over again. I think Earth really accomplishes that goal super well. And yeah, I don't know what more I can say about it. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I would change about the game. There really isn't much. I mean, I think it comes together so well. Every now and then when I'm playing, I make a mistake as to where I'm composting from. Sometimes I forget to put cards that I've composted into my personal compost. I don't know if that's a big problem. The game does run into a small issue sometimes when you just have so many cards in your hand that you can't figure out which cards that you want or don't want. That might bother players who have a little bit of analysis paralysis. I usually work around that by just focusing on cards that seem more exciting to me. So I don't have that much of a problem with that. There isn't much that I change about the game. I think it's incredible production, really, really well done. And I'd put it number one on the non-Stonemaier games that fit all of our guidelines that we probably would have published or would have at least considered or should have considered publishing if it had come across our submission page. And the question that might arise now that I've closed out this list with Earth at number one is, what if any of these games became available? Would we consider publishing any of these games? And that is a different question in some ways, because some of these games there's some newer games on this list, but some of the older ones some of them are evergreen, but some of them may have run their course. They may have gotten past the best or the biggest part of their popularity. And all of them across the board are incredibly well produced. So if people want these games, they're out there for them to get. So I think the equation does change when you're considering making a game that already exists and has already done well and is maybe a little bit past its prime, which I'm not saying is the case with any of these games, but it could be for some of them. And I think it makes me less likely to think about them in that context. I think if maybe many years, if like some of these games fell out of print, they went out of print, and many years passed, and the rights became available, and I thought there was enough interest, maybe we can consider that. But even for these games, I like we did with Libertalia, I would hope to renew a game that really needed that I loved, but also needed a fair amount of work to refresh it and modernize it. And all of these games, I think, are wonderful. They play incredibly right now. They look great on the table. They play incredibly well. I think most of the rule books are fantastic. So I don't think these games really need all that much. They would just need a future reprint. So I'm so happy that the designers found great publishers to work with, and these publishers are doing great things with these games. And I'm glad to have almost all of them on my shelf. Not quite all of them, but almost all these games are on my shelf right now. So yeah, those are my top 10 favorite games, that non-Stonemaier games that we could have published. Maybe that could have been games that we had published. I would have been honored to publish any of these games, especially given how they turned out. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to ask me questions about the types of things that we consider as a publisher, I'm happy to talk about them in the comments below, or talk about our guidelines. I'll post a link to that in the comments as well. Yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks.